She's not allowed to sit out here unattended,
said Serene Vale, president of our HOA board, just seconds before she locked a metal cable around my daughter's ankle and latched it to our porch rail. Mira flinched when the lock clicked. The swing creaked under her sudden shift of weight, heart monitor cable catching on her wrist. Serene didn't blink. She adjusted her embroidered lapel pin like she was swearing someone in for a crime. I've warned you already. Sun exposure, non-conforming medical equipment, unsightly posture, it's all been cited. I stood on the curb, keys still in my hand, watching my daughter chained to her own porch. Is that an official HOA restraint? I asked calmly. Serene lifted her chin. It's part of our emergency containment protocol. I pointed at the lock. Then you might want to review HOA inventory logs, because that lock was logged in an ADA settlement 4 years ago. The serial is still active. And it's registered under state oversight. Mine. If you're a parent or anyone who thinks HOA abuse stops at fines and flowers, you need to subscribe now, because what this woman just did nearly killed my daughter, and she called it policy enforcement. My name is Ran Holtron, I said, chief investigator for the Office of Civil Integrity, and this exact porch, is already under protective monitoring because of a pending accessibility claim. Serene's smug composure didn't crack, but her eyes flicked down, just once, to the body cam lens clipped to my shirt collar. She'd made a mistake. She just didn't know how bad yet. This porch swing? My late wife built it for Mira after the 3rd surgery. The heart monitor she carries can't regulate under heat stress, and the swing shade is the only outdoor spot safe enough for her to sit without collapsing. It faces north, out of sun, out of reach, and until now, out of HOA politics. 2 weeks ago, Mira passed out while trying to get the mail. Her cardiologist said she needed daily fresh air, 5-minute increments monitored. So, we shaded the swing, added non-slip pads, and installed a heat tracking sensor under the porch beam. Every change was within ADA specs. But that doesn't matter to people like Serene Vale. She doesn't see medical devices. She sees visual disruptions. Doesn't see a 12-year-old recovering from heart trauma. She sees community tone violations. That's what she wrote in her email, community tone. The first warning was taped to the swing. The second was slipped under Mira's heart monitor bag. The third came with a fine. And today, she brought a chain. I stepped up the porch, crouched next to Mira. Her eyes were wide, her breathing shallow. Her hand clutched the swing rail, the same one her mother carved Mira's initials into 5 years ago, just before the final surgery. The wood still smells like her. Did she say anything before she locked it? I asked softly. Mira nodded. She said, it's my fault the neighborhood keeps getting uglier. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice to hold. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the master override key from my office, and unlatched the cable in one motion. Mira didn't move. She just looked down at her ankle, red-ringed and shaking. Serene was already calling someone on her phone. Her tone shifted. Now she was the victim. He's interfering. He's tampering with a safety fixture. This is escalation. I turned to face her. That's a child with a class 5 spare heart condition. You chained her to a fixed object without parental consent or medical oversight. It was a soft restraint, she snapped. It was unlawful detainment in front of a state-registered camera while triggering a medical episode. I let that settle. She opened her mouth again, but this time no sound came. Because the neighbor across the street, Mrs. Lenton, was filming, and behind her, the Maleys had come out too, and the Morellos, and Jaspin Reddo, the HOA facilities officer, was standing by the sidewalk, hands half raised, eyes locked on the porch swing like it was a crime scene. Because it was. You'll be hearing from legal, Serene hissed, backing down the steps. No, I said. You'll be hearing from the Department of ADA Enforcement, the State Child Protection Task Force, and a court-ordered injunction filed under my badge. I looked back at Mira. She still hadn't moved. Her fingers were gripping that carved rail like it was the only thing in the world that wouldn't slip away. That's the thing about swing rails. They're built to hold. The fine came 2 hours after the paramedics left, folded in thirds, sealed in a white envelope taped to our front door like a courtesy notice. The wording wasn't new. Section 4.2, subsection B, visual disruption violation. But this time, It included a $500 daily penalty for non-removal of unapproved outdoor fixtures. The fixture in question? The swing my wife built for Mira, now labeled non-conforming structure attached to a community-facing facade. They had a form letter ready, printed, signed, time-stamped, which meant they knew I'd file the incident, and they moved first. Mira was asleep upstairs, pale and curled around her weighted blanket. Her heart monitor had pulsed erratically for an hour after the cable was removed. The EMT said she needed rest, fluids, and reduced stress. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't landed us in a second crisis. I sat at the kitchen table and logged into the Harrow's Crest resident portal. The dashboard was clean, user-friendly, and quietly ruthless. A red banner blinked. Current violation, active. It linked to an itemized ledger with 3 past notices, 2 for Mira being outside unattended, and 1 for visible medical devices without enclosure. The enclosure. That had been the second warning. Back in June, Serene cited us for not enclosing Mira's mobile IV rig in a decorative shield. I'd responded with the ADA compliance statute and heard nothing back until the next violation arrived with a $250 citation. No explanation, no appeal window. What I hadn't realized until now was that Harrow's Crest had digitized its enforcement history. Every violation filed, every neighbor complaint submitted, logged, time-stamped, and mapped. A full behavioral record of Mira's porch time. I scrolled through complaint after complaint from anonymous residents, each tagged with words like unsightly, lingering, sickly presence. One simply read, "The child's oxygen tank is depressing." I clicked on the line item and stared at the source code. The IP trail was scrambled, rerouted through the HOA's internal system. But the structure of the form, the language, the classification fields, it was built for precision targeting. You didn't get a system like this unless someone requested it. I knew what I was looking at. Pattern enforcement, custom tag behavior logging. It wasn't just neighbor complaints. This was surveillance architecture dressed up as HOA compliance. I printed everything. Mira's violation log, the timestamps, the complaint tags. Then I filed a pre-complaint memo under my state badge. Preliminary indication of systemic discriminatory enforcement under ADA Title II. Initial review pending incident report. It was procedural, but it moved the file to a different server, one that wouldn't disappear. That swing was never about aesthetics. It was about control. The next morning, a city landscaper came by for visual inspection of our yard line. He didn't say who sent him, just had a clipboard and a camera. Took pictures of our porch from 3 angles, never made eye contact. I watched from inside, arms crossed. When he left, he tagged the edge of the flower bed with orange spray paint, code for property edge clarification. They were tightening their net. One citation becomes grounds for another, like falling dominoes, just slow enough to look reasonable if no one pushed back. I decided it was time to walk the neighborhood. I took the printed violations with me and crossed the street to the Maley's home. They were outside, pruning their hedge. I asked if they had ever received a fine for their toddler's tricycle left near the mailbox. "No," Melinda said, confused. "Why would we?" I asked if they'd ever been cited for letting their kid play on the driveway in a tank top. "Of course not." I showed them Mira's violations. They read silently, then looked at each other. "We had no idea," she said. 3 houses down, the Vensons said the same. Then the Lenton family. One neighbor told me Jaspin, the facilities officer, had been seen logging inspection notes under Serene's direction almost daily for the past month, always stopping at our porch. Another said her mother had seen Serene snap a picture of Mira during her reading sessions. I thanked them all and made notes. Not just what they said, but who said it and how they reacted. Because it was no longer just about what Serene did. It was about who watched and said nothing. I found Jaspin Reddo in the maintenance corridor behind the HOA office, standing under the yellow flicker of a motion sensor bulb, clipboard in one hand, his other hand pressed flat to the wall like he needed it to stay upright. He didn't hear me at first. The door had swung shut behind me too quietly. When he did look up, he blinked like he'd just surfaced from underwater. "I'm not supposed to let residents in back here," he muttered. I didn't respond, just looked at him. Then at the clipboard, he turned it face down. I waited. "Didn't know you were part of the state," he added. eyes flicking down toward my badge on the inside of my open coat. "Not why I'm here," I said. "I came to see the person who watched Serene lock my daughter to a swing and said nothing." His jaw clenched, not in defiance, something closer to shame. "You filed the inspection report on our porch last Thursday, the one with the flagged environmental disorder tag." He nodded once, stiff. "And the note about passive loitering by minors? That was yours?" Another nod. "But you didn't write the violation language." He paused, then finally said, "No, that was imported from her master doc. I just logged the visuals." I stepped in closer. The fluorescent buzz above us filled the silence. The clipboard wobbled in his hand. "She said it was temporary," he murmured. "Said the kid wasn't listening and that she needed to stay put. I didn't know it was going to. I didn't think she'd actually use the chain." "You helped install the anchors last month," I said. "You signed the work order." "I thought it was for the side gates, emergency egress bolts. We've been replacing lock housings." "You knew it was for my porch." He didn't answer. Behind us, the hum of the building settled into something quieter. I watched his shoulders drop just a fraction, like the truth had loosened something inside his ribs. "She asked me to run the entry scan that morning," he said. "Said you had left early. Said Mira had been left out too long and needed intervention." "Intervention," I repeated. "She said it would just be a formality, that no one would get hurt." I pulled out a folded photo from my inside pocket. Mira's ankle, red and swollen, the faint pressure line from the cable, the timing mark from her heart monitor spike. I held it out. Jaspin stared at it for a long time. "I didn't know," he said again, softer this time. I stepped back. "I don't need you to feel sorry, Jaspin. I need you to decide if you're complicit or ready to come clean." "I'll lose my position," he said. "You'll lose more if you wait until this becomes a federal compliance suit. The ADA team won't care how sorry you are." He didn't argue, just stared at the wall again, like it might give him an easier way out. I left without pressing him further. Sometimes a man doesn't move until the weight of silence starts suffocating him. And Jaspin wasn't quite there yet, but the crack was showing. When I stepped out of the maintenance corridor, I didn't go straight home. I circled around the building and stepped into the public lobby. The walls were plastered with HOA brochures, curb appeal, community pride, together we're order, and a new one I hadn't seen before, safety first, protecting our residents from environmental disturbance. I flipped it open. Photos of fences, closed patios, and, halfway down, an uncredited shot of my porch, the swing and frame, Mira not visible. But I recognized the camera angle. It had been taken from the corner utility box near Jaspin's inspection route. I put the brochure in my pocket. At the front desk, the receptionist gave me a tight smile. "I'm here to review the maintenance request logs," I said. "Under Section 14, Public Infrastructure Access Clause. You can call legal if you need confirmation." She paled slightly but nodded and unlocked the desk drawer. There it was, Jaspin's initials on 5 inspection records. 3 had identical timestamps. 2 of them marked Special Directive, all tied to our address. That night, I laid everything on the kitchen table: records, violations, inspection orders, Mira's medical documentation. I didn't need a smoking gun, I just needed a pattern: the swing, the citations, the chain, the anchor bolts, the camera angles, the form letters, and the man behind the clipboard who'd finally started to shake. The notice came in a black folder this time, not a door tag, not an envelope. A hand-delivered, signature-required packet labeled Final Enforcement Action. It had Serene's signature across the top, written in bold strokes like she was authorizing a military strike instead of condemning a porch swing. The language was precise. Non-compliant fixture must be removed within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in HOA contracted removal and surcharge. Attached were photos of the swing taken from multiple angles, with Mira's head blurred like she was an unwanted object instead of a child recovering from heart trauma. They gave it a name now. Structure 14B. I walked outside, the folder still in hand, and stared at the swing. The wood was aging. I'd refinished it 2 summers ago. Mira had painted tiny stars along the bottom rail, her heart monitor strapped to her chest as she leaned forward with a brush too big for her hands. That was before the HOA had opinions about it, before Serene had decided peace was offensive. The gate creaked down the street. I looked up and saw Darla Venson, a retired social worker who'd lived here for 19 years, walking. Her dog passed the old stone path. She gave a cautious wave. "Got the folder, huh?" she said, slowing. "You heard? They're bragging about it at the community garden, calling it a win for symmetry." I nodded once. "Did you know about the new enforcement clause?" "Not until this morning. We all got the update. Says they're standardizing porch aesthetics, even ours. Yours has a bench." "Not anymore," she said quietly. "Took it down last night. My grandson used to sit there and do his homework. Serene said it counted as an attached visual fixture." Her voice cracked just slightly. Then she shook her head and kept walking. By noon, 2 more notices were delivered to neighboring homes. I watched from the driveway as Derek Maley ripped his in half without even opening it. "They cited my grill," he shouted across the street. "Called it aggressive angular disruption. I'm not even making that up." Later that afternoon, a truck pulled into the HOA lot with bundled lumber in the back, pre-cut fencing panels, neatly labeled, ready for replacements. HOA sanctioned visual conformity, coming soon to every porch in Harrow's crest. I knew the strategy now. Create a pattern of removals. Use it to justify Mira's swing. Turn our story into just one line item in a spreadsheet. They were diluting the outrage, spreading it thin across every porch so no one protest could stick. It was brilliant in a way, monstrous, but smart. I needed to act before it settled into policy. That evening, I found Mira sitting in the swing again, knees tucked to her chest, a book in her lap. She looked tired, but calm. I sat beside her. The wood groaned, familiar and low. "They said they're going to take it," she said softly. "They won't. They always win." I reached out and touched the carved initials on the armrest, LH, Mira's mother's initials, followed by a star. "You know your mom designed this porch before you were born?" Mira nodded. "She said it would always face the shade. She said a lot of things. She said people who smile while hurting are stronger than the ones who yell." I let the silence settle between us. She closed her book. "They hate it because it's kind," she whispered. I nodded. "That's why we're going to fight smart." That night, I filed a formal inquiry request with the Office of State ADA Enforcement. I didn't report the chain, not yet. I reported the swing. I used the exact phrasing from Serene's violation language and then mirrored it against the ADA's guidelines for medically necessary outdoor accommodation. Then I filed a second request, this time with the Department of Child Welfare, asking whether HOA imposed mobility restrictions on minors without legal guardians, present violated state dependency protections. And finally, I sent an internal email to a former colleague at the Attorney General's Civil Oversight Wing. No accusations, no drama, just one question. If a neighborhood policy systematically penalizes medical equipment and minor presence outdoors, how many families need to be targeted before it counts as systemic abuse? I clicked send. Then I stood on the porch and watched the street, because I knew what they'd try next. They came at dawn, 2 maintenance workers in unmarked polos with a folded scaffold and bolt cutters. No HOA logos, no paperwork, just the quiet efficiency of people who'd done this before. I was already on the porch, mug in hand, when their boots hit the walkway. "Morning," one said flatly. "We're here for Structure 486B. He didn't ask. He stated it like it was a line in a script. "You have a removal warrant?" I asked. "Directive from the board," the other replied. He was younger, maybe late 20s, avoiding eye contact. "We're just following protocol." "Then cite the protocol." Neither moved. Mira was awake, watching from the window. I could see her outline behind the curtain, unmoving. I stepped down from the porch, blocking the swing. "Touch that chain," I said quietly, "and you'll be in violation of Section 29 of the State Health Accommodation Act. That swing has been designated as part of an ongoing medical compliance inquiry." The younger one blinked. The older one grunted. "Didn't hear about that." "You will, as of this morning." I held up my phone and tapped the screen. On cue, a ping sounded, then another. Behind me, on the side of the porch beam, a small sensor blinked red. Mira's heat monitor linked directly to a local server that time-stamped every removal attempt. That wasn't a toy. It was logged, ADA certified, and backed by a technical affidavit I'd submitted less than 12 hours earlier to the state's digital compliance registry. "I'd leave now," I said, "before this becomes evidence." They exchanged a look. then packed up. No argument, just retreat. But that wasn't the win. That was the bait. Inside, I shut the door and opened my laptop. The registry ping was mirrored on my interface, just like I'd built it to. A digital breadcrumb. Now any tampering, physical or procedural, would flag both the ADA team and the State Oversight Office within 90 seconds. Still, I needed more than tech. I needed the source of the chain. The original chain, the one she used on Mira. It hadn't been some store-bought bike lock. It had been heavy-duty, black-coated, stamped with a manufacturer's serial number on the clasp. I'd seen enough to memorize the last 4 digits before I removed it. 7684. I didn't go to a database. I didn't pull court records. I called Amira Bowen, a state compliance investigator I'd worked with on a private school accessibility audit 3 years ago. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Tell me you're calling about something I can help with," she said. "I need access to the HOA liability inventory for Harrow's Crest, specifically lock and restraint inventory from the 2021 gate reconstruction project. Please tell me you're not chasing Serene Vale. That woman's name is on 2 archive complaints we could never touch because the board insulated her. She used an access restraint chain on a child. I have footage, and I have the serial." Dead silence. Then, "If you can get me photos of the clasp, I'll cross-reference it with state-purchased units. If it's in the system, I'll find it." I already had the photo ready. I sent it while we were still on the call. She whistled when it came through. "That's not retail," she muttered. "That's a dot class perimeter link. I've only seen those used for crowd control dividers and sanctioned vehicle gates." Meaning, if it's what I think it was purchased with state funds or passed through a municipal vendor. Within 20 minutes, she had it. Found it. Serial 42267684, issued under a bulk purchase for the Harrow's Crest Gate Perimeter Project, intended for temporary security fencing. Distribution controlled by the HOA facilities team. Your guy Jaspin signed the receipt. So, the chain Serene used hadn't just been from HOA inventory. It was state-tagged property, bound by restricted use clauses, and linked to a vendor contract under ADA obligations. She hadn't just violated protocol, she'd violated procurement law, and that gave me jurisdiction. I filed the incident log, chain serial number, and Mira's injury report as a bundle, attached to a formal trigger request for state compliance audit under Article 17B. Once submitted, it couldn't be recalled. A copy was sent to Child Welfare, another to the ADA office, and a third, sealed and time-stamped, was filed to the Attorney General's Infrastructure Fraud Unit. Not because it was dramatic, because it was precise. And this time, they couldn't call it a misunderstanding. Mira collapsed on the porch just before dusk. No warning, no cry. Just the soft thump of her body sliding off the swing, knees buckling under her like a marionette with cut strings. The monitor on her wrist chirped once, then flashed red. I was halfway down the stairs before the swing even stopped swaying. Her breath was shallow. One eye fluttered. Her hand clutched at the porch rail, trying to lift herself. The same teakwood rail her mother carved, the same one she'd been chained to 3 days earlier. I scooped her into my arms and yelled for the car keys. She didn't speak. Her skin was cold, and her heartbeat under my palm stuttered like a skipping stone. The monitor registered an arrhythmic spike, a clear signal of stress-induced cardiac event. I knew what that meant. I'd studied her condition for years, memorized every risk window. This wasn't just exhaustion, it was trauma resurfacing, triggered by the place meant to keep her safe. The ER was 15 minutes away. I made it in 9. They took her in. Before I finished spelling her name. It wasn't the first time I'd stood under harsh white lights and watched strangers wheel Mira away. But this time, I wasn't just a father. I was a state officer holding a record of system abuse. And that changed everything. They let me back once her vitals stabilized. The attending physician handed me a chart with quiet efficiency, eyes scanning my badge. "We recorded the episode," she said. Her heart rate spiked abnormally in a pattern consistent with acute psychological shock. Not a failure of the device, not overexertion. This was stress, Mr. Holtron. Something triggered her nervous system into overload. She was sitting on the porch. That's her comfort zone? It used to be. The doctor lowered her voice. Whatever's happening at home, it's not just physical. I nodded. I know. When I got back to Harrow's Crest, the porch swing was still there. But something else was waiting, another citation, taped to the door. Only this time, it wasn't for the swing. It was for continued residence of a dependent minor with persistent non-conforming care structure. They were citing me for Mira, calling her presence a violation. That changed everything. I went inside, pulled down the evidence board I'd built in the home office, and laid out the timeline. Mira's first violation, visual disruption due to medical clutter. Her second, prolonged unaccompanied minor presence. The porch swing's label, structure 14B. The chain serial, 42267684. The fine print under the latest violation used a term I hadn't seen before, behavioral displacement risk. I looked it up. It's not standard HOA language. It's from a private consulting manual used by property management firms that specialize in gentrification enforcement. Systems built to identify, label, and quietly remove families deemed unmarketable. They weren't just citing Mira. They were trying to build a legal case for removal. It wasn't just about the swing, or the chain, or the aesthetics. It was about displacement. I checked the HOA board's public agenda. There was a vote scheduled in 5 days for community liability reform, including proposed restrictions on unsupervised minor access to shared outdoor spaces. If it passed, Mira wouldn't be allowed on the porch unless accompanied by a non-resident third-party care provider, not a parent, not a legal guardian, a hired observer. Like she was a liability, not a child. I stared at the screen for a long time, then opened a new file. I began drafting a comprehensive incident brief, timeline, photos, medical records, witness statements, public documentation of the ADA violation, procurement logs, video timestamps, chain serial registration, medical diagnosis, trigger metrics, the ER report, the swing's construction history, Mira's carved initials, and the quote from the latest violation, persistent non-conforming, care structure. I highlighted it, enlarged the font, and centered it on the first page. Then I opened a new browser tab. I uploaded the document to the State Department of Civil Infrastructure, then to the ADA, then to Child Protective Oversight, and last to the Office of the Inspector General on a form used only for pattern-based abuse by regulatory bodies or residential associations. I hit submit, and with it, I committed to war, because now it was no longer about Mira's safety. It was about her right to exist. Jaspin showed up just after midnight. No knock. Just a hesitant silhouette outside the porch window, outlined by the soft flicker of our security light. I opened the door slowly, already expecting him. He didn't speak right away. He was holding something, an old gray binder, thick and warped at the spine, like it had been hidden for years in a place not meant for files. "I shouldn't be here," he said. I stepped aside. He walked in without making eye contact and laid the binder on the kitchen table. His hands trembled as he opened it. "I kept copies," he said. "Things I wasn't supposed to, memos, drafts, proposals Serene never filed through official channels." He flipped through pages fast, like if he looked too long at any one of them, he'd change his mind. Inside were printed emails, policy templates, agenda drafts marked internal use only. They called it phase matching, he said. Aesthetic standardization rolled out in stages, but it wasn't just about looks. I scanned the pages. Phrases leapt out. Flag-dependent households early, porch presence is key indicator. Minimize optics of prolonged illness visibility. Prevent community tone disruption through minor activity restraint. Every sentence was dressed in policy jargon, but the intent was unmistakable. This wasn't beautification. It was behavioral cleansing. Make the sick invisible. Make the vulnerable vanish. "They built a system to push families out," I said. Jaspin nodded. "And I helped install it." "Why now?" I asked. He looked toward the hallway, where the light under Mira's door glowed faintly. "I was in the ER last year," he said. "My sister's kid, same heart condition, didn't make it. I saw Mira on that porch the day she collapsed, and I froze. I saw her all over again." He slid a flash drive across the table. "What's on this?" "The anchor installation footage from HOA storage. I wasn't supposed to pull it, but I did. You can see the chain being prepped. You can hear Serene call it containment." I inserted it into my laptop and pulled up the file, grainy footage from a corner security cam. Jaspin standing in frame, awkward, shoulders stiff. Serene pacing, clipboard in hand, her voice was clear. Make sure the chain length only allows 6 feet of movement, just enough to keep her in place. I stopped the video. That was it. The final piece. The intention. On record. Can I use this? I asked. I'm giving it to you, he said. Use it however you need. I watched him for a moment. The guilt on his face wasn't performative. It was heavy, settled deep. A man carrying the weight of being silent too long. You'll be named, I warned. When this goes to hearing, they'll come after you. I'm not worried about them anymore. Why? Because you didn't break, he said. And I don't want to be the man who helped someone like Serene chain a kid to a porch and then kept sweeping the sidewalk. He left without asking for protection, just nodded and disappeared into the dark. I sat there in the kitchen, binder open, flash drive in hand, the air thick with something heavier than victory. Guilt, relief, a strange fusion of both. Then I went to the printer and started compiling everything again. This time, I included Jaspin's footage, added it to the compliance report, time-stamped, matched to Mira's medical episode. I uploaded the updated file to the state oversight portal. Then I sent it to 3 reporters I trusted, people who knew how to interpret legal jargon and wouldn't sensationalize the wrong details. I closed the laptop. Outside, the swing swayed gently in the breeze. Inside, my daughter slept through the night for the first time in days. By morning, I was no longer working alone. The Office of Civil Infrastructure confirmed receipt of my updated report at 7 to 12 a.m., sealed, reviewed, and forwarded under emergency designation to both the ADA Oversight Division and the Department of Child Welfare. The email was short, just a case ID and a single line. Investigation status, active. Status updates will be routed directly to your office. It meant they'd seen the video, the chain, the binder, the words, keep her in place, and that the system Jaspin had kept hidden wasn't just a paper trail anymore. It was legal evidence. I didn't wait for them to move. I had work to do. First, I contacted Mira's pediatric cardiologist, Dr. Velen. I asked him to provide an affidavit confirming the swing was not just therapeutic, but medically necessary, especially during post-episode recovery. I emailed him the citation that called the swing aesthetic clutter. He didn't respond with outrage, just efficiency. Within 2 hours, I had a notarized statement backed by medical codes, risk classifications, and a photo of Mira's heart monitor data the day she collapsed. Then I reached out to Darla Venson. She'd once served on the HOA Advisory Council before resigning quietly. I asked her why. Because I voted against the phase matching policy, she said, and Serene changed the vote count after the meeting. You have proof? I have the original minutes, she replied. They were never uploaded to the public record because she replaced them with a different version. An hour later, she dropped off a thumb drive and left, without saying anything else. The original minutes showed the vote failed, 3-2. But the publicly posted record flipped it, 5-0 in favor. That alone was enough to trigger an audit. But I wanted more than an audit. I wanted insulation. So I opened a new file and started drafting what we call an integrity lock, a sealed evidence packet built to survive redactions, deletions, or obstruction. Once submitted, it couldn't be altered without triggering a notification to every agency on its recipient list. I labeled it Holtron v's Harrow's Crest HOA. Inside, I compiled everything. Mira's diagnosis, the porch swing history, the fine progression, the binder, the flash drive footage, Darla's minutes, the state equipment serial, Dr. Velen's affidavit, and the community map of targeted households I had quietly built over the past 2 weeks. 27 properties, all fined or cited within the last 90 days, all with children, elderly or visibly ill residents, all marked non-conforming in language that mirrored Jaspin's binder. I coded the files, time-stamped each with my internal badge credentials, and filed the lock into 3 portals: the Attorney General's ADA Task Force, the Office of Public Integrity, and, most importantly, the State Insurance Risk Board. That last one mattered more than people realize, because if an HOA is found liable for systematic discriminatory practices, and the Risk Board pulls their coverage, They can't legally enforce their own penalties until new insurance is verified. In other words, Serene could bark all she wanted, but without insurance, her teeth were gone. At 3:16 p.m., I received a read receipt from all three agencies. At 3:22 p.m., I got an automated response marked urgent. Pending field audit scheduled for on-site compliance review within 48 hours. Risk Board recommends immediate freeze of local enforcement until preliminary findings are logged. I knew what that meant. They weren't asking. They were coming. That evening, I rewired the porch swing sensor to the external door cam and adjusted the tilt so it would catch the entire sidewalk, just in case. Mira sat with me on the steps, her legs pulled in tight, a blanket around her shoulders. She didn't ask what I was working on. She didn't need to. She just leaned against me and whispered, "I want to paint the stars again." "You will," I said. "But what if they take it?" "They won't." "But what if they try?" I looked at her, really looked, at the bruising on her ankle almost faded now, at the faint scar above her collarbone from the first surgery, and the deeper one just under her neckline from the second. "They can't take what you built with your mom," I said, "and they sure as hell can't take what I've built to stop them." The night before the inspection, I prepared the house like it was a crime scene, because in many ways, it was. I printed 4 copies of every report, 1 for each, agency rep, plus a master copy with certified timestamps. I laid them out on the dining table in chronological order, Mira's medical affidavit first, then violation notices, then stills from the porch cam, followed by Jaspin's binder excerpts and the flash drive transcription. In the hallway, I hung the HOA's own brochure next to Mira's ER intake report. The swing photo, watermarked with visual disruption, sat opposite a heart monitor graph, spiking at 6:12 p.m. The moment she collapsed. I didn't want to argue emotion. I wanted to show how methodical the abuse had become. At 7 a.m., I walked the perimeter. The orange spray paint marking our zone line had faded, but the residue was still there. I left it untouched. Evidence, not blemish. The porch swing was clean, sealed, and untouched, just like it had been the day Mira passed out. The only addition was a small aluminum plaque I drilled into the upper beam. In memory of Lynera Holtren. This swing is protected under ADA Clause 12-7, outdoor rest provisions for medically fragile minors. I made sure the font matched the HOA's own street signage. By mid-morning, a black SUV and 2 state vehicles rolled into the cul-de-sac. Neighbors started drifting out of their homes, first the Vensons, then the Maleys, then 3 others I hadn't spoken to in weeks. No one said anything, but they didn't go back inside, either. 2 agents stepped out first, one from the Civil Infrastructure Task Force, the other from the ADA Oversight Office. A third, in plain clothes with a visible recorder badge, represented the Office of Risk. And behind them, bringing up the rear, was Inspector Arian Teska, a quiet presence from the Department of Child Welfare. I knew the name. He wasn't theatrical. He didn't posture. He just ended things. We didn't shake hands. He walked up the steps, nodded once toward the swing, then toward the camera embedded in the post rail. I unlocked the door and let them in. We moved through the evidence slowly, deliberately. No one interrupted. No one dismissed. When I got to the part about the binder, Jaspin's file, Arian held up a hand. "Who supplied this?" "Jaspin Reddo, facilities officer, voluntarily, last Sunday night." "Is he still employed?" "He hasn't been seen on HOA property since." "Smart man," Arian said. The ADA agent, a woman named Shaylin, asked about the swing's material. "Teak," I said. "Weather-treated, non-splinter, no exposed fasteners, cleared by 2 pediatric physical therapists and a cardiac recovery specialist." And the violation cited it for visual clutter, improper anchoring, and, quote, childlike expression inconsistent with neighborhood maturity standards. The Risk Board rep didn't even blink. He just circled a box on his form. We moved outside again. The porch was silent. Mira watched from the front window, but didn't come out. She didn't need to. The officials walked the perimeter, measured distances, noted the location of the anchor bolts, took photos of the sticker on the heat sensor. The inspector asked for a copy of the override ping I'd triggered during the chain incident. I gave him the file. It had 6 mirrored timestamps from 3 devices. "Your swing," he said finally, "has better monitoring than half the assisted living ramps in Broward County." "That's intentional," I said. "They came for it once. They'll try again." Teska turned toward me. "And what about the child?" "She's safe, but she's not sleeping, and she hasn't painted since the lock." He didn't write that down. He didn't need to. By 1:30 p.m., they wrapped the review. Shaylin handed me a copy of the preliminary notice. It wasn't a full decision. Those would come later. But the last line said enough. Pursuant to Article 8 of the State Accessibility Protection Act, all enforcement actions regarding this property are to be suspended immediately pending final review. Any further HOA engagement may result in civil penalties. And under that, in the Risk Board's smaller seal, recommend immediate insurance hold pending audit of HOA practices. It was like watching the first crack form in a dam, quiet, irrevocable. They drove off without ceremony, but every neighbor on that cul-de-sac watched them go, and every one of them knew what they'd seen. The chain was invisible now, but its shadow stretched across every porch in Harrow's Crest. I found the retaliation notice nailed to our mailbox that night. No envelope, no watermark. Just a laminated sheet of paper with the HOA header crudely photocopied and a bolded statement across the top. Failure to comply will result in escalated sanctions. No signature, no contact number. Just paragraphs of vague threats about ongoing noncompliance, community disruption, and the HOA's reserved right to pursue civil intervention where neighborhood harmony is compromised. It was a warning shot. Desperate, reckless, and completely illegal under the freeze order delivered that same morning. I peeled it off and carried it inside, placed it on the kitchen counter, and photographed it from 3 angles. Mira watched from the hallway, arms crossed, silent. She didn't ask what it was. She knew by now what retaliation looked like. I uploaded the photos to the case file and sent an update to the Risk Board. No commentary, just the timestamp and attached surveillance footage of an unmarked car pulling up to our mailbox. The passenger stepping out, posting the sheet, and driving off without a word. It wasn't Serene. It was someone new. A man, hat pulled low, but it had her fingerprints all over it. She was trying to test the line, seeing how far she could reach before the legal machinery caught up to her. So I gave her something to trip on. The next day I invited 3 families over, neighbors who'd all been targeted for their non-conforming household presence. The Vensons came with their grandson, who still wore a soft leg brace from his last growth surgery. The Maleys brought their twins. And Darla came alone, her eyes tired, jaw tight. I set chairs up on the lawn, laid out cold water and sandwiches, and told them what I had. Everything. The binder, the video, the Risk Board suspension, the upcoming hearing with the ADA, and the class action templates already prepared by a civil rights attorney in Coral Springs, who had agreed to file on contingency if 5 households joined. I showed them the violation map, each house highlighted in orange, with attached citations and their matching language patterns. Behavioral terms, medical references, implicit bias phrased as design policy. I didn't try to convince them. I just let them see the shape of what had been done. No one spoke for a while. Then Derek Maley looked up from the stack and said, "She's not going to stop." I nodded. "She thinks the board protects her. They always have. Then we changed the board." That came from Darla. She pulled out a file folder of her own, handwritten names, notes, a timeline of her own that tracked violations against 10 households, all quietly filed away during her time as an advisory member. "She deletes the records after 90 days unless they result in payment," she said. "But I saved the originals, printed each one before they vanished." The folder was thick. "I wanted to say something last year," she added, "but I was waiting for someone who wouldn't blink when she barked." "You found him," I said. We formed a committee that night, informal, no positions, no politics, just purpose. We'd speak at the next HOA meeting, scheduled in 3 days. We'd read from our violations out loud in front of the board. We'd bring our children, and we'd record everything. Not for outrage, but for record, for law. Serene didn't know it yet, but her war had spilled too far. She crossed the line when she chained a child. She buried herself when she tried to erase it. And now the porch she hated, the one with stars painted beneath the swing, initials carved in wood, and medical sensors wired like lifelines, would become the place that unraveled her. Not in silence, not in secret, but in the full, unforgiving light of day. They held the meeting in the community clubhouse, as they always did. Folding chairs in neat rows, coffee urns pushed to the side table, agenda packets waiting in a wire basket beneath the podium. But this time, the room wasn't indifferent. It was watching. Nearly every seat was filled. Darla sat front row, folder balanced on her knees. Derek and the Maleys were just behind her. Even Mrs. Lenton, who rarely left her porch, came with her cane and a copy of her own violation. Mira was with me, not hidden, not left at home. She sat in the swing I disassembled from the porch that morning and brought with me, bolted onto a steel base I fabricated overnight. It sat right in front of the board table, centered like a witness chair. A statement. The meeting began like all the others. Dry roll call, motions to approve minutes, finance summaries. Serene sat at the center of the board's long table in a cream blazer, hair swept tight, smile practiced. Her tone never wavered, until the floor opened for public comment. I stood first, not as Ran Holtron, resident of Lot 14B, but as Chief Investigator Holtron, Office of Civil Integrity. I introduced myself by title, agency, and case number. Then I placed the laminated ADA freeze order onto the podium. After that, I turned on the projector and played the clip. The grainy video of Jaspin's inspection log, the anchor bolts, Serene's voice. Just enough to keep her in place. Gasps in the crowd. Someone stood up in the back. Serene leaned forward, lips parted slightly. She didn't blink. I paused the video. This restraint, I said, was issued through a state vendor for use on emergency fencing. It was not approved for minor containment. It was applied to my daughter's ankle, without consent, without protocol, without reason. I let the silence stretch. Under state law, this constitutes false imprisonment of a minor. And under ADA Title II, it qualifies as hostile environment enforcement. Darla stood next. She read from her folder. Every date, every violation erased from the official record. Then she handed the originals to the risk board rep, seated quietly near the back, an observer with a badge clipped to his breast pocket and a recorder pen blinking red. Others followed, the Maleys, the Vensons. Each read a paragraph. Each recited the coded language. Phrases like tone degradation, medically adjacent equipment, porch presence, minor dependent visibility. Each violation an echo of the last, each one traceable to the same voice. Finally, Mira stood, not to speak, to sit. She walked up to the swing and took her seat, slow and deliberate. The base clinked against the tile. She curled her legs under herself and opened her book. No drama, no speech. Just the act of being seen. Serene shifted for the first time. Her hand flexed against the table, her jaw tensed. This, I said, gesturing to the swing, is not a fixture. It's a lifeline, my daughter's lifeline. And this board tried to cut it. Someone in the audience clapped, then more followed, then the whole room. The board tried to call for order. They banged the gavel, cited procedural rules, threatened to end the meeting. But the risk board observer stood. Per active investigation protocol, he said, this hearing is now part of the official record. Any obstruction will be documented as interference with an ongoing compliance review. Serene looked ready to speak, but nothing came. She knew. It was done. The inspector walked to the front and laid down a folder of his own. Inside, a formal recommendation for temporary board suspension pending audit results, with immediate cessation of all enforcement activity against named residents. 23 names, Mira's at the top. They read them out loud, one by one, no one interrupted. The porch swing didn't move, but the power in the room did. They took down the sign the next morning. Not just ours, the whole street's. Every HOA-issued community aesthetic zone marker was quietly removed by a city maintenance crew, dispatched under the Risk Board's emergency audit authority. No ceremony, no announcement, just the quiet undoing of power disguised as policy. Serene Vale resigned that afternoon. No apology, no statement. Just a notarized letter delivered by courier to the temporary board secretary and filed alongside a Risk Board citation that listed 3 words under cause: patterned enforcement abuse. They cited her for the swing. They cited her for the chain. They cited her for the erasures, the phase matching policy, the targeted citations, and the modified board minutes. They suspended enforcement operations in Harrow's Crest for 90 days and placed the entire board under review for potential civil penalties. She was done. But Mira wasn't. That evening, she walked outside in her sandals, a new paintbrush in hand, and knelt beside the porch swing where it belonged. I had reinstalled it an hour after the vote. The bolts were tighter now, reinforced, the finish cleaned and sealed. She didn't ask permission. She just dipped the brush into a jar of deep blue and began repainting the stars her mother once helped her draw, each one slow and careful, like she was reclaiming something the world tried to erase. The neighbors came out again, not as witnesses this time, but as neighbors, one by one. A quiet nod from Darla, a wave from Derek. The Maleys stood in their driveway, hands on their kids' shoulders. And I sat on the porch and watched the swing sway gently in the breeze, my daughter painting starlight onto wood like it was a map back to something no one could chain again. It wasn't just about the swing. It never was. It was about the right to exist in peace, to sit where you're safe, to breathe where your body tells you it's okay, to have a place that doesn't treat your difference like a defect. This porch was never a violation. It was a promise, and now it was protected. State oversight stayed on for the next 3 months. The board was restructured, public elections mandated. Mira's case file was sealed under ADA child protection guidelines, and the risk board issued a policy change that would eventually be called the Holtron Provision, requiring independent ADA review for any HOA citation issued to a medically fragile resident under 18. It's not flashy, it won't make headlines, but it will stop the next chain from being clipped shut. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what justice looks like, not always a gavel or a headline, but a child painting a star where someone once tried to erase her. So if you're reading this and you've been told to shrink, to comply, to remove something that keeps your loved ones safe, don't. Document, report, push back, speak up. And if you're the kind of person who believes that silence keeps you safe, let me be clear, it doesn't. Because one day, someone like me will show up with a swing, a badge, and a file so thick it can't be shredded. And we won't be asking for permission. We'll be restoring what should never have been touched. Where are you watching from? If you believe in standing your ground with truth, subscribe now. Because more families are fighting this battle than you think, and they deserve to be seen.